The Shooting Range. In this episode, Pages of History, how the people at the Yakovlev Design Bureau tackled a task that was impossible due to three separate reasons. Tactics and strategy, how to deal with heavily armored opponents, and metal beasts, a Japanese Cobra with a female flight crew. This is a modern attack helicopter from Japan, currently the only helicopter representing this country in War Thunder. Behind the peculiar name, Kusarazu is the licensed version of the famous American Cobra, a machine that is known for its predatory looks, light bulletproof armor, and menacing ATGMs. In the frontal part of the helicopter there is a flexible turret with a 3-barreled 20mm cannon which elevates from -50 to +25 degrees and rotates horizontally up to 115 degrees either way. The 1,300 horsepower engine can get you from 0 to 500 meters in less than 50 seconds. A two-man crew is protected by 20mm of boron carbide composite armor on the sides of the cabin. There are also additional 12mm of armor around the engine, as well as under and behind the pilot's seat. The fuselage bears an image of Wakana Kusarazu, one of the 4 fictional characters known as the Kusarazu Sisters, who happen to be the actual mascots of the 4th Anti-Tank Helicopter Squad of Japan Self-Defense Forces. Some years ago, photos of this very real camouflage became widely popular within the internet community. And now, this amazing camo is represented in our game as well. This helicopter performs pretty much like a regular Cobra. Don't expect it to break speed records or withstand heavy enemy fire. Its main purpose is to fight ground vehicles, and it's got various payload options to do just that. Add a couple of M134 mini guns to your 20mm autocannon, and you'll be dominating in a fight against any light vehicles. Fast Mighty Mouse rockets are what you use against somewhat bigger prey. But your first choice will usually be the TOW, the most powerful missiles at your disposal. They have only one disadvantage, a 3-kilometer firing distance, so you'll have to get pretty close to your potential targets. Hunting on this Cobra isn't really that hard. All you have to do is cling to the ground. Hide behind terrain features or among the rocks or sometimes at the level of the highest tree crowns. Well, you get the idea. Don't be an eyesore to your enemies. And then at the right moment, peek out of your cover and strike them dead. Aim your missiles right at the tops of their hulls or turrets. That way, you won't have to deal with reactive armor. Of course, you've got your own nemesis. Naturally, we're talking about anti-aircraft vehicles. This helicopter has got no flares and no IRCM. So, if you come across a Tunguska, there are only 2 things that can save you: your maneuverability, which is quite good by the way, and your aiming skills. Alexander Yakovlev, the famous Soviet aircraft designer, is often criticized. For example, they say that he wasn't that good of an engineer, just really good at climbing ranks, and that he allegedly used his high-level connections to push aside other, more talented designers with their projects, greenlighting the mass production of his own very troubled Yak-1 fighter. We will leave all the talk about intra-party intrigues to somebody else. Instead, we'll try to look at the story of this aircraft from a more interesting, well, at least to us, point of view, focusing on its design and how it came to be. What were the problems that Yakovlev had to solve, under what conditions, and what he managed to achieve in the end. Welcome to Just the Facts with Bruce J.J. Grant. First, let's remember that the Yak-1 had to be made of wood and not some exotic tree. Just the most common pines and birches that USSR had plenty of. That automatically guaranteed problems with extra weight. And you might ask, how is that possible? Wood is obviously lighter than metal. That doesn't make sense. Oh, but it does. We answer to that, and here's why. Say we need to make a power component of given durability. Being made out of wood, it would weigh about a kilogram. But a duraluminum one would weigh only about 600 grams. That's because there is this thing in aviation material science that's called material weight efficiency. Weight-wise, wood is a lot less efficient than a light metal alloy. Just think about it. Yakovlev had to create a rival to the Bf-109 by making wood perform just as well as the best materials in the world used by Germans. To be honest, that task seemed impossible to solve. But it was solved. Even though Yakovlev had to give up some of the aircraft's durability, what if he'd want to make the aircraft tougher? Then the plane would acquire extra weight once again and end up as, the LAGG-3. This one was durable all right, but had a lot of problems of its own. Working with wood wasn't the only problem, though. At the engine plant, they promised Yakovlev that he'd get the newest M106 engine capable of producing 1350 horsepower, and with a turbocharger to boot. The aircraft were designed to use this exact engine, but when the first prototype was already built, it turned out that the engine just wasn't there, and never would be. Getting the turbocharger was also out of the question by that point. But hey, Tavorish Yakovlev, why so sad? You still have the M105 engine. Sure, it's 300 horsepower weaker, but you can make the plane lighter, recalculate the aerodynamics. After all, you're the best aircraft designer in the room, aren't you? Countless planes never left the drawing board because there wasn't a right engine for them. The Yak-1 should have become one of them. It was almost impossible to build it without the engine that it was created for. And then there was the matter of deadlines. Yakovlev's construction bureau received the order to make a new fighter aircraft right after the parade of May 1st, 1939. Designing it from scratch, assembling a prototype, testing, for all of that they only had half a year. Now, let's give you some perspective. It took the team 2 whole years to take the Bf-109's prototype to the sky. And this one had a direct predecessor in the form of the Bf-108 Typhoon. The American P-40 and the British Spitfire took the same 2 years, and the Japanese Zero demanded even more time. Not to mention that Yakovlev's construction bureau had fewer workers at their disposal compared to all those other companies. It was impossible to build the Yak-1 in half a year, for at least 3 reasons. It was built nevertheless. Sure, it turned out to be a very troubled fighter, but all its issues were pretty well much solvable, and with time, they were solved. As for the LAG-3, it had only one serious problem, its weight, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Finally, here's another small but remarkable episode. Right before the war, Yakovlev's team conducted a stunning demonstration of a project with a pitch that went basically like, what would happen if we could, so to say, redesign the Yak-1 in metal? The experimental full-metal I-30 fighter with 3 Shvak cannons, 2 Shkaz machine guns, and the same ill-fated 1,050 horsepower engine outperformed the Bf-109F in almost every imaginable way. Later, a couple of those beasts were defending the skies of Moscow and shocked the Luftwaffe bomber crews. Alas, at that point, there wasn't enough duralumin in the whole country to get a production line going, and so the production Yak planes were assembled from wood and steel tubes, and there were thousands of them. All of us love that moment when the armor of our tank bounces an enemy shell right off, especially if that enemy happens to come at us with a powerful high-caliber cannon. But what about all the times when we are that enemy, struggling to get even a single round in? There are actually a few things and tricks that can make it possible for you to penetrate even the heaviest of armors. Interested? Let's go. We'll start very simple. You're probably aware that on many tanks and SPGs, the lower frontal plate isn't as well armored as the upper one. Sometimes penetrating a lower glacis plate will only damage the enemy's transmission, on German Panthers for example. But there are tons of tanks that have their modules packed really tightly, and a single shot through their lower plate can often send them to the hangar, just like that. Another thing is that it's not only places with thin armor you should look for, but also places with really flat armor, or simply vertical plates. The closer to 90 degrees the angle of the armor plate is slanted at, the less effective its thickness is. Take a look at the turret cheeks of a Tiger II-H. A powerful enough round will pen them, no problem, while Soviet-sloped dome-shaped turrets proved to be a much more serious challenge. But they have similar, flatter areas as well, for example, to the left and to the right of the gun mantlet on both the T-55 and the T-64. You also should be on the lookout for all sorts of hatches and commander's cupolas. The armor of a T-29 can easily be penetrated if you shoot at the area around the radio gunner's machine gun. Despite its thick composite armor, the T-72A is very vulnerable to hits on its driver's optics, right under the gun in the upper side of its frontal armor. And, well, there are probably no people more aware of the extreme vulnerability of their cupolas than the tankers who play the mighty T-95. A good hit to the turret ring will almost certainly wreck the opponent's horizontal turret drive. And if you're lucky enough, will take half the crew out as well. Turrets of some tanks like the Tiger II-P, the T-54 1947, and even vehicles from the mighty Abrams family are built in the way that a part of mantlet effectively serves as a shot trap. We're talking about this area here, the lower slope. If you manage to land around there at a certain angle, it might bounce right into the roof of the hull, hitting crew or ammo. Of course, simply shooting at the roof of a hull also produces great results. It often has very thin armor, even on top MBTs. Of course, if you're on even terrain, it might be pretty difficult to land a shot there, but if you're shooting from up above, it's a completely different story. Often the weakest area is the roof of the engine compartment. If you're on an SPAA armed with an autocannon, that might be your only chance to destroy an MBT. Finally, you have to remember that high-rank tanks are usually protected not only by layers and layers of composite armor, but also ERA packages, and the most advanced of those, like the Contact 5 used on the T-80U, will protect the vehicle from both heat projectiles and subcaliber rounds. Keeping that in mind, try to shoot at the areas that are not covered by ERA blocks. If there is no time to find those, as it usually happens in battle, just shoot at the bottom of the turret or the gun breech. This way, you'll give yourself some breathing room to deal with your opponent in a more methodical fashion. After all, nothing beats being able to search for your enemy's weak spots while they're too busy dealing with other problems to do the same to you. The first message was sent by a player, Kyoyo Jr.
I like that you guys are testing all of the vehicles in real life. Keep up the good work.
Well, we have to say that it's not always possible. But when it is, even if it's just a sliver of a chance, we do everything in our power to go full hands-on with a vehicle. By the way, there will be a video about one of those cases on the channel pretty soon. Just a heads up. A user called Serhat Yüksel writes,
So you think 100 millimeters of wood is equal to 100 millimeters of steel? Then why don't you make your tanks wooden so they can be lighter and can swim?
You're speaking about heat projectiles, we presume? It might seem strange, yes. But if we're speaking strictly about the Monroe effect, then yeah, there isn't much difference between wood and steel. A superplastic jet created by a heat warhead doesn't really penetrate armor in the usual sense. At typical velocities, the penetration process generates such enormous pressure that you get non-linear physical effects, leading to the situation where both jet and armor may be treated as fluids, with their material strengths completely ignored. And it doesn't really matter what kind of obstacle is in the way: wood, steel, or even foam plastic. The distance the jet travels is important though, because the stream disperses after a short distance.
Green Iron asks, what type of bullet on an aircraft do you prefer in a dogfight?
Stealth belts are the best. They require some getting used to, but if you get the hang of it, you won't miss the traces. With a stealth belt, it'll be much more difficult for your opponent to understand where the attack comes from. Yes, we're talking about just a few moments of confusion, but in air battles, that's a matter of life and death. By the way, there's a guide to aircraft belts on the channel. There might be some useful info for you there. A user called Datum asks,
Hey Gaijin, is there a chance of us getting a standalone Pages of History show? Just curious.
Well, we really like the shooting range the way it is. Some of you watch it for tactical advice, triathlons, or challenges. Some of you enjoy Hotmail the most. Thanks to those leaving a timestamp for the start of the Hotmail in the comments, by the way. A lot of you really enjoy Pages of History, which is great. Is that enough reason to separate the show into several videos, though? The last message for today was written by Eddie Roylo.
Can you make a video where you talk about armor specifically? Explaining differences between cast homogeneous armor and rolled homogeneous armor, for instance?
Certainly can be done. Thanks for the idea. Well, that's it for today. You've been watching The Shooting Range by Gaijin Entertainment. So, subscribe to the channel and press that bell button. Now, you gotta leave a like. And tell us what you think in the comments below. See you in a week.